I'll be gone in a day or two.
The Last of Us 2 is not the critical darling that its younger sibling was. Tim Rogers made a 3-hour review exploring how The Last of Us won 200 plus Game of the Year awards and why that isn't necessarily a bad thing. This time around, however, Naughty Dog has made a game that is not for everyone, and I want to emphasize that that is okay. And in my opinion, they should be commended for this. Even though this game isn't for everyone, that doesn't mean it is not a beautifully well-crafted game and a seminal video game experience. This is going to be as spoiler-free as possible. That being said, it's an extremely hard video game to review without spoilers. Basically, it's going to have more spoilers than the pre-release reviews, but probably going to be right in line with reviews that came out when the game released. If I'm being vague, there's a reason, is kind of where I'm getting at. I'm not intentionally not elaborating on things. And because the story's just so hard to pick apart, I'd be totally open to making more Last of Us content. So let me know down in the comments what y'all want. I could make some Last of Us videos that are kind of more exploratory but have more spoilers. Just let me know down below, and if you found this video helpful, please throw us a like. If you love us, then please sub us, and feel free to also check out my Last of Us Part 1 review. We're going to start with the story, and this is by far the hardest part to review. The antagonist of The Last of Us 2 is hate, and right off the bat, this theme makes the game not for everyone, frankly. This is a revenge story exploring cycles of hatred, revenge, and grief, with Seattle as a backdrop, a quarter of a century after an Earth-ending pandemic. And in general, it's a bit harder to attach yourselves to these characters, partially because they're intentionally pitted against you throughout the entire story, whereas The Last of Us Part 1 was a much more compartmentalized and one-sided telling of what was going on. Naughty Dog got extremely lucky with the themes and the times. In this game, there is literally a resistance group overthrowing fascist law enforcement and establishing their own territory during a pandemic. I mean, that's literally happening in Seattle as we speak. And that just helps to make this game hit a little harder. And it helps to make these themes bleed through a little better. And it helps to make you question what's happening in the world today a little bit better. The game hits harder right now, and I guess Naughty Dog got lucky this time around. I love when video games do something which can only be done within the medium. The Last of Us Part 2 uses gameplay to garner different perspectives for the player, which enhances the storytelling. You will find yourself, the player, becoming the monster you were criticizing just a few hours prior. It's really crazy how playing as a character can make you change and inhabit and roleplay that character so much better than you could have with a movie, for example. This 25-hour story is meant to be replayed to fully see how everything plays out. Time skips around quite a bit in The Last of Us Part 2, and you'll definitely get a different and more enriched perspective playing the game a second time around. I do have some complaints about the story. There is one side arc with the Seraphites, a religious group in Seattle, which I personally thought was meh. It did work to build a core character in the plot, but the Seraphite side characters, auxiliary characters, just came off as a little meh to me. There's also one pacing killing section in The Last of Us Part 2. In a 25-hour story, it's hard to be perfectly paced all throughout. And there are definitely little fumbles of pacing, but in general, I think The Last of Us Part 1 was so fantastically paced. And there's just one section, I mean, we're literally talking about Halo 2 ending levels of cliffhanger, followed by just a huge upending of the pace of the game. And I like the section, which we can talk about in a more spoilery video, but I still think it hurts the overall pace of the game. And let's talk about the presentation slash visuals. This is by far the most beautiful game I've ever seen. It pretty much blows everything else out of the water. That's not to say that there aren't a few bugs and glitches here and there, but all in all, this is just an absolutely beautiful, well thought out, visually designed game. The animations are incredible. Naughty Dog's well known for their animation skill, but this is just out of this world. I'm pretty sure all the cutscenes are in engine, and they're just absolutely beautiful to look at, and you'll be watching quite a few cutscenes. And the seamless transitions into gameplay are just buttery smooth and really emphasize just how beautiful this game can be, how technically sound Naughty Dog is, and what an experience and a ride that you're being brought on and interacting with. And I don't usually talk much about the sound and the music, but let me just say that this soundtrack hits. Particularly the combat encounters, there's a pulsing, tense, perfect vibe through every encounter track. I really love the encounter tracks. There are calm moments with the signature solo acoustic guitar, which Ellie can now actually play. And every voice actor, and I don't even want to call them voice actors anymore because they're just actors. They do the motions too. Every actor in this game should be commended. There was not a single performance that I personally disliked. From a gameplay perspective, The Last of Us Part 2 really starts to set itself apart in level design, UI, or lack thereof, and occasional glimpses of this seamless merging of open-endedness. There's no icon telling you where to go in The Last of Us Part 2, and when there is something happening kind of indicating where you should be going, it's all very physical. Like if you have a map with a destination, that map isn't an arbitrary screen or icon. You actually unfold a map and write on it. Naughty Dog starts to explore, which they also did in their last Uncharted game, an idea of open-endedness in the form of a central hub that branches out into levels. You can kind of think like Mario 64, except in 2020. And I kind of wish they did this a little bit more than they ultimately do. They kind of tease you with it in the very beginning and pick it back up once or twice towards the end, but not at nearly the same scale. But it's still really promising to see where video games are going to be going. And the levels subtly guide you. There's never an icon on your screen. There's never a compass. There's never a dot. There's never a quest icon. None of that's there. The levels do all the work. You might see a huge American flag with its prominent red, white, and blue among this green world, subtly guiding you that that's the direction that you should be going. This is masterclass design, and I really hope that this is the future of video games, where we can essentially use intelligent level design to subtly guide you in semi-open spaces which lead you down more linear sections. And when you do need a UI, it's mostly physically based when possible. I think this really adds to the immersion. The closest comparison for general gameplay like combat encounters would be a combination of Tomb Raider mixed with Resident Evil mixed with Metal Gear Solid 5. You're constantly low on resources in Last of Us Part 2, like in Resident Evil. You rarely have more than a handful of bullets, and I really do mean a handful. You're lucky if you have a clip full in your pistol. It's high on stealth, with multiple ways to approach each scenario, like Metal Gear Solid 5. You can go prone in this game, you can sneak through tall grass, short grass, you can hop over reasonable surfaces, you can squeeze your way through narrow corridors, and you have a decent arsenal to help deal with enemies. And their action set pieces, much like the Tomb Raider reboot games, reminded me a lot of what you're going to be seeing in The Last of Us Part 2. There's also great enemy variety. There's the infected, which are varied in and of themselves. There's multiple types, all of which bring something to the table, and it's really cool when you have more than one type interacting at the same time. There's also two warring factions which both interact very differently. One is slightly more stealthy. They use bows, they use melee weapons more than guns, and the other uses hunting dogs, for example, which all kind of adds new elements to the combat. It's mostly The Last of Us 1 combat enhanced. So if you like The Last of Us 1 combat, you'll definitely be happy here. It's much better on pretty much every level. And what really shines is in this game in particular, The Last of Us Part 2, multiple groups can come out at one time. You can see these two warring factions, the wolves and the scars, fighting each other. You can also see infected fighting the wolves. And you're kind of put in this mix, and you can choose how you want to interact with the groups. Do you want to send the infected out against the enemies? Do you want to just sneak through while they're busy fighting? Do you want to just kill everyone? You can really take control of how you want to control each scenario. And all of these encounters are within large environments, and as I said earlier, there's many tools to help you carry out your objective. A subtle note, I do appreciate that Naughty Dog knows how to flex a horrifying monster without it being cheesy, like in Resident Evil, and they know how to kind of up your arsenal without you feeling ridiculously powerful. Also, like in Resident Evil, where the monsters generally are cheesier the more monstery they get. And, I mean, look at what happened with Resident Evil 5 and 6. We kind of know how there is this tightrope that you need to walk when you're going to up an arsenal and introduce more horrifying monsters. Naughty Dog knows how to handle that, where some other AAA companies, many other AAA companies, simply don't. I do have some complaints about the gameplay. There is an upgrade system, a character upgrade system, and a super cool workbench weapon upgrade system, which I could just watch for days. You put your weapon out and you physically make alterations to your weapon, which then carries with you through the whole game visually. If you put a scope on the rifle, you see the character put the scope on the rifle, and then you carry it with that scope for the rest of the game. This never reaches its full potential the way that the game is structured, unfortunately. But like I said, there is that New Game Plus, which helps. There's also a heavier reliance on your ability to essentially echolocate. It's even included in the higher difficulties. I still tried not to use it, and I could mostly get away with it, but there are occasional times where you can kind of get a cheap shot from an enemy because you didn't use it. It seems like Naughty Dog expects you to use it more this time, which I guess for me at least is kind of a bummer. This is a game about hate during a time of hate. It can be hard but essential to look at our own reflection and accept the human condition. We are flawed, and hate drives us to do horrible things, which cascades into a vicious cycle of hate and revenge. Now's the perfect time to reflect and try not to fall into that cyclical trap. The Last of Us 2 provides a perfect backdrop for this personal exploration, coupled with a fantastic presentation and solid gameplay. The Last of Us 2 is the perfect game for the times, as well as a fantastic video game.